Number 1. The Figure in the Basement. I bought my first home about 10 years ago. It was a townhouse, with 3 stories in a basement. I also had a tiny fenced-in backyard. I wasn't really great at meeting new people, so I really didn't know how to go about introducing myself to the neighbors. But I didn't have to make the first introduction. I was in the backyard, getting ready to give the very small lawn a mowing. I heard someone behind me tell me, "Hi there." After a brief startle, I turned and noticed a guy, maybe in his mid-60s, standing in the backyard of the adjacent house. We made introductions and the usual neighbor small talk. I told him where I was from, and what I did for a living. He told me how long he had been living in the house he owned, and what the neighborhood was like. It was just normal neighbor small talk. However, strangely enough, he asked me, "Did you hear about your basement?" I had no idea what he meant by that. I told him the basement was fine. He asked if I had heard what had happened in it. I told him no, and asked for him to elaborate. He shook his head and told me it might be a good idea to talk to my realtor. Apparently, they were required by law to tell me those things. He didn't want to get into it. It was weird, but I tried not to think about it too much. Even if something had happened in my basement, it was in the past. I wasn't too worried about it, and thus I did not call my realtor, nor did I ever talk to my neighbor about it again. He didn't ask me if I had either. A couple months after I moved in is when this odd experience took place. I had some family over to see the house. We had a small barbecue in the backyard. My neighbor that had told me about the basement, his name was Mike, was over as well. Once again, he did not bring up the basement at all. I guess he felt that whatever had happened was just between me and the people who sold me the house. After everyone left, and they stayed late, drinking beer and talking, I was still in the backyard cleaning up. It was dark outside, but I had a nice patio light that kept the place looking really good. I was cleaning up the grill, facing the house. Something caught my eye, and I quickly glanced over at the basement door. I very distinctly saw the face of a young lady pressed up against the window on the basement door, watching me. I was so startled, I literally fell backwards on my butt. Despite that, I looked back at the door, and still saw the lady watching me. After a moment, the face turned away from me, and the person appeared to walk down the basement stairs on the other side of the door. I didn't have my cell phone on me, and the basement wasn't accessible from the house, so I didn't have to worry about anyone being in the house. I ran up the stairs to my back door, got to my phone, and called the police. I kept an eye out the back window to see if the lady at any point tried to leave. I didn't see that she did. The police arrived, and I gave them the basement key. They went down there and found nothing. One of the officers copped a bit of an attitude with me, thinking that I knew the history of the house, and that I was playing a prank. I had no idea what he was talking about, until it was explained to me that 20 years earlier, the house was empty, and a woman in the neighborhood was kidnapped and kept in the basement, which had been broken into. She unfortunately died in the basement. I was completely unaware of any of this. However, many people in the town knew about it. So, they may have just been playing a prank on me, I don't know. But I never saw anyone again in the basement. Number 2. The Old Cellar. One of my favorite hobbies is going out and exploring old abandoned buildings. Of course, that sort of thing just breeds scary stories. I used to explore in more urban areas, but they're not nearly as fascinating as rural buildings. I belong to several groups that like to explore old buildings. Members often suggest to others the locations of abandoned buildings so they can be further explored. However, the strangest thing I ever explored was not actually a building. This occurred in a rural area in Maine. The area is actually very good for exploring, as there are tons of abandoned barns and buildings in it. I was looking for an old barn, and I lost track of where I was. I'm not sure how much you know about Maine, but it has a large amount of forested area in it. It's definitely not the kind of place that you want to get lost in. Also, I have never really been lost before. At least, not as significantly as I got that day. As I wandered around the woods, I thought that my main goal should be trying to locate the barn. I knew the way to get there, so arguably I should be able to find my way back out of the woods when I found it. As I was wandering, I didn't find the barn, but I found something even stranger. I found what appeared to be some old cellar doors. There was no building, or even an old foundation as far as I could tell. It was just two cellar doors in the ground. I began thinking that maybe me getting lost was a good thing. When I did get out of here, I would likely have a good story to tell. There were no locks on the doors. They were a bit of a bear to get open, though. When I finally did, I was surprised that they did not fall apart. The steps led down into a really dark and dank area. I took out my flashlight and slowly entered the cellar. Walking down those stairs was quite the freaky experience. They creaked and bent under my weight. Plus, I had no idea where they were leading, other than just underground. The cellar was interesting. I can't even begin to describe it. It had an earthen floor. Wooden support beams and shelves made up the majority of the walls. But surprisingly, there was even a really old bed laid up against one of the walls. There was also a table that was cluttered with objects. Walking over to the table, I soon got the shock of my life. There were two things laying on the table that I would have never expected. One thing was the decayed remains of what was clearly a human hand. That was freaky enough, but the scarier thing was a newspaper. A newspaper that was only dated 3 days earlier than the date that I was there. That meant that not only did someone have a decayed human hand on their table, but they had recently been to that cellar. Shocked, I immediately went back to the stairs and tried to make my way out of the cellar. I almost expected one of the weak stairs to break under my weight as I hurried back up the steps. I got to the top, looked all around to see if anyone was watching. I quietly closed the door, and then hurried back out into the woods as quickly as I could. The walk back through the woods was very nerve-wracking. I know it's cliché to tell you this, but I thought every sound I heard was the inhabitant of that cellar coming back. I had no idea if he was directly responsible for that human losing his hand, but I didn't want to find out. It took me 2 hours to find my way back to my vehicle. It was dark by the time I got there. I was so on edge that I had to check the back seat of my car for intruders. I even looked under my car. That was my last time exploring that area. Number 3. The Door. My parents bought an old house when I was 10 years old. My dad had gotten a really good job and wanted to buy a bigger place for us. The house was huge and it was old, but kept in really good condition. All of us kids got our own room. We had a huge attic to keep all of our storage in. There was also a very large and dark basement. but it was completely empty. The one really interesting thing about the basement, though, it has a small door on one of the walls. It was locked, though, and my dad was never given a key for it. That little door became something of a fascination for me and my brothers and sisters. My dad told us, "Don't let your imaginations run wild." He said it was likely just a small room that had tools in it, or maybe it had nothing in it at all. But yeah, telling us not to let our imaginations run wild pretty much just ensured that it was the very thing that was going to happen. Growing up, we used to tell all sorts of stories about what could possibly be behind it. My brother thought that maybe it was a room that the children would hide in when their parents were angry and fighting, like some sort of child panic room. We had a lot of other ideas about what it could have been, but I really don't want to bore you with all of that. From age 10 to 16, I would have never considered trying to break down the door, or trying to pick the lock or anything. I wasn't scared of my dad, but I knew that if I broke into it, after he repeatedly insisted that we don't, well, he would be pretty angry at me. It was when I was 17, and I was home alone, that I finally found out what was in that room. My family was out of town, and I had a few friends over. After a lot of horsing around, my buddy began talking about the door. We got really curious, and he kept insisting that I try and get it opened. I refused at first. I tried telling him that my dad would get angry. When that didn't work, I told him that the door was much more interesting when we didn't know what was really in there. That didn't work either. Well, none of my excuses worked, and I had to admit I wanted to know what was behind that door. So we got some tools and decided to go and open it up. I won't go into too much detail explaining how we did it, although that it did take a while. Finally, though, we did get the door open. Behind that door was the weirdest thing I had ever seen in my life. It was a really small room. I mean, I would have been too big to fit into it myself. There was no lighting, so I had to use a flashlight. There were what seemed like Latin words scrawled on the wall. They were smeared with either blood or red paint. I told myself it was red paint. However, the decaying corpses of several birds that I assumed were crows were laying in a disgusting pile in a corner of the small room. I assumed that the red smears on the wall had to be from their blood. And the weirdest thing was that there was a little child-sized rocking chair facing the far wall of the tiny room. There appeared to be a doll on the chair. Turning the chair around, I saw the doll. Its dress was covered in what I assumed to be bird poop. Its eyes were ripped out of their sockets. It had scratches on its face, rips in its clothes. It was missing both of its legs below where the knees would have been. It was just freaky and pretty damn weird. I didn't take anything out of the room, and I closed and relocked the door. I didn't want my dad to get angry at me for opening the door when he repeatedly told us not to do it. But it created so many questions that to this day I have no answers to. But weirdest of all, it really made me more uncomfortable than I had been previously when I had no idea what was behind that door. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. I hope you enjoy these stories. I didn't get any 4th of July submissions, so I decided not to do a video of them this year. I hope everyone had a good July 4th, even non-Americans, because even though it's not a holiday for you, it's still a calendar day. I've still got the GoFundMe campaign running for my friend for insulin and the moving costs. We've actually made $1,280 of the goal so far. If you can donate or share the link, it's included in the description. I wanted to remark on the generous donations, kind words, and all the help. It's very positive for me because it makes me a lot less jaded to see people helping out each other. There's so much hate and division in the world right now that it's comforting to see generosity and kindness. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please consider hitting the subscribe button below, or use the icon of Ichigo that will appear at the end of this closing. Feel free to leave me a comment to let me know what you think, and consider sharing this video with someone you think might enjoy it. You can always follow Ichigo and myself on Facebook and Twitter. If you have a story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. My only requirement is that it is original and has not been read on any other channel. Thank you all for your continued support, and please don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.